Hello, welcome. Oh, noisy. So I'm just playing in the background a bit of my brother playing some classical music. It's a bit funky, and he's good at what he does. He's a musician. I am Davina, and this is the Pro-Democracy Variety Hour, or DAV Chat, and I'll be talking about a few different things. Kim Potter, and who's just been found guilty of manslaughter in the first degree. I'll be talking about COVID, including the new variant Omicron, and what that's meaning for hospitals around the country. And what else will I be talking about? Oh, and a little bit of American history as well. So we'll be looking at some of the reasons why schools were closed in a county in Virginia in 1959. And it's a hint for that it was racism. There was resistance to segregating schools, to the legal compulsion to segregate and integrate, sorry, not to segregate schools, to integrate American schools and to include Black children in the public education system. All right. Press pause. That was my brother. He's a good piano player. I hope the volume wasn't too noisy. Let me know. Oh, Molly's here. Hi, Molly. Lovely to see you. So I've had a little bit of a cold, got tested for COVID. It's not COVID, but I guess my body's adjusting to being in a cold climate for winter as opposed to being in the year-round equatorial climate of Singapore. So let's look at the news first of all. Healthcare Insider is reporting that top ER doctors in several states have told this news platform, Health Insider, that the COVID wave currently at play is forcing them to refuse life-saving treatment to patients because there isn't enough room for all the sick and injured people to get the emergency care they need. So emergency departments are filling up with people from either the Delta or the Omicron wave, both, and that's causing a lot of triaging, headaches, and emotional heartbreaks for the doctors, to say nothing of the bad outcomes for patients who can't get timely medical care. So Dr. John Hick told Insider that his colleagues are examining people sitting on the floor because they have literally run out of space to put them. He also said, every shift I'm working these days is like the worst shift in my career. So, of course, one of the factors contributing to the prolonging of this pandemic, the unnecessarily long duration of the pandemic in America, is because of the high rate of unvaccinated people. Now, anti-vaccination sentiments predated COVID, and Trump have helped accelerate those tendencies towards contrarian, baked-in opposition to modern medical science. So people wanting to say, I trust my body's natural immunity, are all subscribing to a naturalistic fallacy that's been fed in part by bad faith actors on the internet who have tried to grow their own influence, either for reasons of self-importance and financial reward, or because literally the Kremlin is known to have been participating in fueling anti-vaccine sentiments and anti-vaccine rhetoric in mothers group channels, in Facebook health groups, and pre-Facebook in other groups, just mothering groups on the internet, which had led to various measles outbreaks, even though measles is a disease that there is a efficacious vaccine for. Measles is also one of the most contagious diseases. So you walk into a room of 100 people, one person is exhaling measles-laden breath, and you could have the other 99 people in the room become infected because the infectivity is so high with measles. And doctors really sat up around the United States when researchers began to suggest that Omicron could have a transmissibility rate that is equivalent or approaching equivalency with measles, because measles is renowned as a very highly contagious disease. That knowledge may have dropped out of the public's consciousness to a large degree because the measles vaccine is so efficacious, and people are compelled to have children who've been administered the measles vaccine prior to attending most educational institutions. So measles, not eradicated, but largely unheard of, except in areas where contrarian spirits run high and a fit takes hold of people, perhaps people who spend lots of time in online mothering forums and weren't inoculated against disinformation and came down with the anti-vax bug. That would be great if I talked about anti-vaccination sentiment in terms of, oops, have I got the wrong? Here we go. Molly wants to know if I got my flu shot. I did get my flu shot. Thanks for asking, Molly. But there's apparently low congruency, I think, between this year's flu shot and the strain of the flu that's currently circulating. Molly needs heart surgery but has to wait. The surgeon has delayed several patients that need surgery. You're taking a medication to help you and you feel fine. Well, that's good. I'm glad your surgery was genuinely elective surgery that you can have at a later stage without putting your heart in significant jeopardy. That's good to know. But yes, Christopher Lucas is here. Hello, Christopher. Nice to see you, buddy. I'm just going to close one window. Hopefully that doesn't affect anything. There we go. So yes, a lot of elective surgery being postponed. And while some people may presume, oh, elective surgery, that means cosmetic surgery. No, there's a lot of surgery that people need for their health. It's just not imperative that they get it within the next few days. So you can introduce a period of delay without necessarily condemning someone to significant ill health. But there are a lot of people that will still be condemned to an increase in pain or an increase in risk profile, people whose cancer removal surgery may have been delayed, and that increases their risk profile. Metastatic cancer developing. I should have got myself a glass of water. That is not full. All right. And I don't have COVID. I have been to a drive-through testing clinic. I was very impressed at the turnover time for results. And I know that's not a result that's replicated all over the country, because obviously in some areas, particularly where COVID is spreading more rapidly, that there's been bigger wait lines. And that's probably more of an infrastructure problem rather than a reflection of levels of COVID spread, actually, because New England's had some of the highest levels of COVID positivity rates lately, and a lot of testing as well. New Hampshire, and I'm in Massachusetts, so I should look up what the rate is. I just know that I'm worried. I'm really glad my two kids have both had not only 2 shots, but also more than 2 weeks have elapsed since their second shot. So at least, hopefully, they have a high degree of antibodies relative to COVID at the moment. Although with the Omicron variant, they're suggesting that even 2 shots may not be adequate, or you may only have 30% protection against Omicron as related to after a booster, when you might be more likely to have 70 to 79% chance of protection against Omicron. So, all right, should I put in a little bit more music and we'll transition topics again? This is my brother. I'm playing from his YouTube channel. All right, and we'll have a look at the next item. Okay, so the next news item I'm going to look at is Trump filing with the Supreme Court to ask that the January 6th committee be prevented from compelling compelling the National Archives, Presidential Archives, from turning over his records. Let's have a look. What's that called? A certification, petition and stay application. Emergency relief from SCOTUS to prevent NARA from turning over various of his records to the January 6th committee. What's NARA again? Steve Vladek, who is a scholar from University of Texas in the law faculty and a commentator on various mainstream media channels, he thinks that it's unlikely that the court will grant emergency relief in this case, at least in part because he doesn't think there's a majority to take up the case on the merits, but we probably won't know one way or the other until sometime in January. And then he gives a date of, so we'll suggest mid-January. So if they deny Trump's petition to seek relief, then the freeze lifts, and then January the 6th gets his records. Now, I think what they're trying to establish with those records is that Trump impeded or instructed the work of Congress, i.e., by failing to take action to protect the Capitol, he was invested in the outcome of his followers preventing Congress from certifying Joe Biden's electoral victory over him, Donald Trump, and therefore advancing a two-part plot, one procedural and one violent. Violent attack on the Capitol combined with a procedural plot to pressure Vice President Pence to throw out the result of the election, to fail to certify the results, and to encourage all of the Republicans to vote against certifying the election results from states that had, at an individual level, certified results. I'm really grateful that America has the Electoral College system actually just in that moment, because it meant, rather than just everything, the election being conducted from a federal command center, all the states administered their own elections, and there was enough people who held the line of democracy to be able to safeguard the democratic results of that election. There were enough people working to advance American democracy. Molly says, Christopher's got to go. Bye, Christopher. Thanks for tuning in. Molly says she's quite angry because the ICUs are full of COVID patients. They even created a COVID ICU in the emergency room parking lot at the hospital that you would be in if you were having your scheduled heart surgery at the pre-organized time. Yeah, so that's unfortunate that unvaccinated patients, people who are essentially complicit victims in a disinformation campaign, an international, a global disinformation campaign against modern medical science. Now, vaccinations aren't perfect. They don't guarantee that you won't contract a disease. They enhance your risk profile in a beneficial way. So for different variants, the risks are different. And depending on your own personal health profile, the risks are different. But overall, people who are vaccinated are far less likely to be hospitalized for severe COVID or to die from severe COVID. So there's no guarantee, but you want to take out the bullets, as many bullets as you can, from a revolver that's being aimed at your temple in a pandemic, and the trigger will be pulled. You don't want to play Russian roulette with a lot of bullets in the gun. Even if there's 100 chambers in that gun, if you know that there are 2 bullets and you can remove one and just have one bullet in that gun, it's still risky being alive in a pandemic, particularly if you have high levels of comorbid conditions, but you want to improve your chances. Molly says she's noticed a lot of those loudmouth Republican legislators are being quiet after Cheney read Meadows' text messages. That's really good because Jim Jordan is being requested to turn over various records to the January 6th committee, and a lot of their involvement may be used to provide evidence for a criminal charge against Trump, and will also illustrate to their constituents that they knew that Trump was responsible for inciting his followers to attack the Capitol and to injure the 140 police officers that were injured. Oh, Bob's here. Bob's got a Twitch account just so he can join in with the comments. I really appreciate that, Bob. It's so nice to see you. He was watching on Twitter before, but there wasn't or I couldn't see his comments. So just for people watching via Twitter, I'm sorry for whatever reason I can't see any comments from you, so you're not being ignored. So yes, Jim Jordan. This is an important point. Republican minority leader of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, tried to make Jim Jordan the ranking member on the January 6th committee when he was invited by Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, to nominate some Republicans to be on the committee, making it bipartisan. Kevin McCarthy nominated Jim Jordan, even though it was known at that point that Jim Jordan had spoken to the president. Or at least Jim Jordan said he couldn't really remember. He speaks to the president all the time. Could he remember if he spoke to the president on January the 6th, one of the most consequential days in American political history, one of the most consequential, memorable, dramatic days in which legislators feared for their very lives? Nope, he couldn't remember. But Kevin McCarthy tried to make Jim Jordan the ranking member representing the Republican Party on that committee. Nancy Pelosi, very fortunately, had a veto ability with regards to establishing that committee and said, no, you cannot have Jim Jordan on my committee. And Jim Jordan is now being asked to be a witness for that committee. So it's going to be more widely understood that he was a key player in terms of representing for Republicans as they pleaded with Donald Trump for their lives, essentially asking him to call off the mob. Now, there was one piece of reporting that said Kevin McCarthy had spoken to Trump to say these Trump supporters are breaking into the Capitol, and the president was reported to have said, well, Kevin, I guess they're just more upset about the election than you, i.e., my hands are tied. These people are just all riled up with genuine indignation over the theft of the election from me, who's the most worthy, most successful, most popular, least orange, wonderful man in the world. And you, Kevin, haven't done enough to demonstrate your loyalty to me. You haven't done enough to find a way to overturn the election results and overthrow American democracy. So Bob notes that January the 6th committee is getting massive amounts of texts and calls, which is great because there's a lot of people who presumably threw caution to the wind because they were just trying their hardest to help Trump stay in office and get a second term to which he was not entitled by democratic process, and that keeping Trump in power would keep the rule of law being bent in their favor. So it would keep Trump in the ability to dispense pardons for any crimes they committed, so they were perhaps more ready to commit crimes in the lead up to the insurrection because those crimes would be paid off by virtue of imbuing Donald Trump with the ability to continue to issue pardons to obviate criminal consequences for any of them. So yes, Bob is saying hello to Molly, which is lovely. It's the holiday season, so yes, we're all saying hello to each other. Happy Hanukkah, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and soon Merry New Year as well. Oopsies. Okay. This commentator, his name is Eli Honig, and he's a senior legal analyst for CNN. He says that the committee is now taking off the kid gloves with other members of Congress, a necessary and well-justified move. First, Scott Perry, now Jim Jordan, and Kevin McCarthy should be next. you don't care about the election as much as I guess these people care more about the election than you, Kevin. I'll be happy to hear testimony about that. I'm happy to hear testimony about anything, because all of this, all of the revelations about what happened on January the 6th are critical as a pushback against fascism, fascist authoritarianism, whereby Republicans and their leader, Donald Trump, are able to build on American susceptibilities to racist arguments, that social security is too generously dispersed to undeserving people. And for those people who think that there are real Americans and then there are less deserving Americans, whether they know it or not, often their idea of what is a less deserving American is shaped by years and years, and decades of racist rhetoric. From Reagan was quite powerful at doing this. Nixon did this as well, to characterize Black people as dismissible, as strongly affiliated with drug use, young people strongly affiliated with drug use and needing to shape up, and deserving of being drafted to Vietnam. That was part of Nixon's efforts to shore up American support for the war effort through that fascist technique of identifying a victim and then generating lots of propaganda, lots of rhetoric to unify people against an identified enemy, an identified scapegoat, and to continue to characterize everything the scapegoated group does as a threat. So the war on Christmas and the critical race theory hysteria is all to help make Republicans more violent and more disinclined to vote for Democrats. When I say Republicans, I'm including Republican-leaning people, because there's two elements in American elections, and that is one, voters need to be mobilized to turn out because voting is voluntary. Unlike in some other countries, say Australia, where I'm from, where it's compulsory to vote or you are fined. And the second feature of American politics is there are quite a lot of independent voters who can be persuaded to vote outside of a team identity. They can vote for a Democrat or a Republican. So if you just control the narrative to introduce enough negative narratives that stick to a Democratic candidate because you can lie and your conscience encourages you to lie in order to gain power, then that advantages the liars who oppose the thrust of modern social progress. They oppose freedom to marry in accordance with your sexuality. They oppose the freedom to exist according to your the gender you feel best, that is most congruent with your inner self. And they oppose the freedom of workers to unionize and to use their collective strength in numbers to advocate for acceptable living conditions and acceptable working conditions for themselves. So there are various fascist interests that like to align to oppose modern developments of improvements in working conditions, like the weekend, health and safety considerations, not being killed by faulty equipment or the negligence of others, having some kind of safeguards against those, and also individual freedoms. Now, I'm not including gun owning freedoms amongst that because it's a net loss, gun owning freedoms, a net loss created by lying about the Second Amendment and what it actually means. Because the freedom of some people to own guns is very powerfully connected to a net loss of freedom on part of the community more broadly, in that people are then more likely to be killed by emotionally disruptive people, emotionally dysfunctional people who at that moment in their lives can't see a way ahead, can't see how to resolve arguments, can't see a future for themselves, and choose to pursue sociopathic outcomes like shooting up the Sandy Hook school or shooting their family or even shooting themselves. The lives lost from suicides are not lives that would be lost if guns were not as profusely and widely available, prolifically distributed. Bob notes that there was a great broadcast today on WNPC PBS about newspapers or local newspapers being bought up and gutted. I will have a look for that. Thanks, Bob. Molly notes that Meadows handed over massive amounts of texts and emails and apparently used 2 Gmail accounts outside of his work email account, which should be highlighted is a no-no. And we know it's a no-no because of the wide reporting condemning Hillary Clinton for using a personal account to discuss personal matters, creme brulee recipes, etc. But it was made into a big deal of manufactured outrage because she deleted her personal emails from her personal account. Whereas Mark Meadows is conducting not personal matters, he's conducting matters relating to the government in terms of the overthrowing of the government by making plans with people on different Gmail accounts. And I guess the fact that he used outside work email accounts will be used to highlight mens rea, a guilty awareness and intention of committing crimes, because that's the element of surreptitiousness. You're trying to avoid consequences by evading scrutiny. And I believe it was 9,000 pieces of evidentiary information handed over. So 9,000 emails, texts, and documents. Today.com. News that isn't owned by a conglomerate. I don't quite get what Bob's saying, but the actual words read, it should be say to find, maybe easy to find. It was on Today. Soon, other news that isn't owned by a conglomerate will be listener-supported news like NPR. Listener-supported news. NPR has gotten more right-wing. And I was Twitter criticizing a gentleman from NPR who was noting that COVID has driven down immigration rates and that this is hurting the economy in terms of making less workers available to work in needed occupations. So there'll be labor bottlenecks. And I said, how can you report on a reduction in immigration over the last few years without noting the widely reported on fact that underneath Trump, legal immigration was cut in half? So it's widely reported on. You can find lots of articles about it, but it's not necessarily something widely listened to by the public because being reported on and being talked about in mainstream news media is 2 different things. So yes, Molly notes, didn't Trump attack Hillary Clinton over using a private email? Ivanka used a private email too. Yes, and I'm convinced Ivanka Trump is quite likely to have used a private email address to conduct business relating to her position in the White House as a government employee. And when people on the right try to complain about Hunter Biden, it's like he was not, unlike Ivanka Trump, he was not employed by Joe Biden at any point to work in the government. So yes, his connections and his high profile as the son of the president or the vice president for 8 years definitely put Hunter Biden in a position of greater notoriety. Tucker Carlson himself asked Hunter Biden for a favor to write a letter of recommendation for his eldest son, Buckley Carlson, to attend Georgetown University. All right. Anything else? I better go. But doctors would like there to be circuit breakers that could slow COVID spread. Yes, that would be nice, but I wonder what the level of political appetite is for circuit breakers. If people see hospitals or if there's enough reporting on the imminent danger that members of the public are in, you can't be in a road accident right now. And obviously that's not something you can decide to avoid. You can decide to reduce your risk by avoiding being on the roads. But very few people get on the roads thinking I might be in a car accident today. But the fact of the matter is, If you are in a car accident and your life is in peril and you need emergency care, that care is less likely to be available to you because of the high rate of COVID cases in emergency departments and in intensive care units in hospitals. All right. Many of the donors that are opening their wallets for senators, Democratic senators Sinema and Manchin, have never donated to Democrats before and are giving the money to the two senators because they approve of the way they are managing to reshape Dem priorities. So yes, that's probably not a surprise to people who follow politics closely. Republicans are donating to Senators Manchin and Sinema for sabotaging the Democratic political agenda of helping American citizens and American residents. There's a video of 3 hours of attacks on the Capitol building, and I'm just going to play a little bit of it because it's extraordinary to see these people and to know that, yes, they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew that police were opposing their entrance. They were summoned to the Capitol by Trump. Alex Jones has said he was told by Trump to tell people he would give another speech on one side of the Capitol. So you have a mixture of organized people conspiring to take over the Capitol with violence and unorganized people who turned up to see Trump support and then went with the crowd to the Capitol. Some people who understood that they were hoping to participate in a revolution in which the government was overthrown, and some people who were just going along with what the president told them to do. He told them to walk with me up to the Capitol. Here's 43 seconds of footage of what some of those people did. So there's no sound on it. It's just, I think one police officer is firing pepper balls or some type of deterrent, and the mostly male Trump supporters, some women. Oh, I can see that blonde lady with a scarf. She was arrested, and she also memorably cried on camera and complained about being gassed at one point. There we go. So that was just 43 seconds of the police once they'd started to retreat. All right. Monadnock Hospital is overwhelmed in southern New Hampshire. And your sister in New Hampshire says not many people are wearing masks. The CDC made a big old misstep earlier, and they have my compassion to a degree because they were hoping to incentivize more people to take up vaccination. But that was based on a severe miscalculation that people's opposition to vaccines would be reduced if they were offered something. Look, we won't ask you to wear masks anymore. We won't bother you about masks wearing if you get vaccinated. But the truth is, there were so many people who didn't want to get vaccinated because they had all that insurrection energy from January the 6th and hoping that the injustice of Trump's election loss would be remedied. And they've put all that energy into being an insurrectionist against public health. A lot of Trump supporters have put that energy into opposing taking steps, even with a vaccine that Trump was initially claiming credit for. And there's been a big pause, and he's just started talking about it again. In fact, I thought I'd saved it in my bookmarks, but it's okay because I can find it. And I'm not going to leave without saying that the economy is the strongest of any first-term president in 50 years. The jobless rate has been reduced to 4.2% in November from 6.2% in February. And the American Rescue Plan, Biden threw $66 billion into 36 million households, which helped people eat, helped children eat, helped the economy, because when people are given money that they can use to spend on their immediate needs, that's money that's not getting squirreled away by wealthy people who don't really need it. That's money going to people in need who are instantly returning that money into the churn of the economy because they're buying immediate goods for consumption because they need to eat, they need diapers for their children, they need commodities to keep their lives turning. All right. Candace Owens was trending, so maybe that will have the video. I just want to see a little bit of that footage of Trump recommending the vaccine.
Vaccine is one of the greatest achievements of mankind. And I came up with a vaccine, with 3 vaccines. All are very, very good. Came up with 3 of them in less than 9 months. It was supposed to take 5 to 12 years.
And yet more people have died under COVID this year, by the way, under Joe Biden, than under you. And more people took the vaccine this year. So people are questioning how.
Well, no, the vaccine worked, but some people aren't taking it. Some
people aren't taking it. The vaccine worked, but some people aren't taking it. And the nature of a disease that spreads is that the longer it's around, the further it can spread. So yes, more people have died because a proportion of a larger number of people is an increasingly large number.
The ones that get very sick and go to the hospital are the ones that don't take the vaccine. But it's still their choice. And if you take the vaccine, you're protected. Look, the results of the vaccine are very good. And if you do get it, it's a very minor form. People aren't dying when they take the vaccine.
What about the masking of children? That's a big one for moms right now. I think it's a
terrible thing. I don't like to see the kids with the masks.
Look how she tried to switch it away from Trump saying the vaccines are effective and you'll be protected significantly against severe disease and death if you have the vaccine. She's like, what about kids wearing masks? Because that's just terrible, isn't it?
When they're sitting in school, they have a hard enough time sitting in school.
Looks like China. I've been to China.
And yet China's education system's a hell of a lot better than ours. You know what?
Looks like China. So her logic for opposing mask wearing by children in schools, which is a mandate in some schools and a recommendation in others, instituted to prevent them from getting a disease and spreading it to their families, because children who lose caregivers to COVID also have significantly bad outcomes. But Candace Owens is saying she doesn't like the look of it. It looks like China. We live in a pandemic. Accept this historical reality. I know a lot of Trump supporters are primed to resist that historical reality because Trump did initially describe the pandemic as being a Democratic hoax, as being a confection of the media and the Democratic media and Democrats wanting to make him look bad and wanting to suggest he was an incompetent leader who didn't really care about Americans and only cared about keeping up the facade of a healthy country so that the stock market didn't fall and he could still keep making a claim to be good at the economy. Yes, the more people who get it, the more likely it is to mutate. Bob's noting that the CDC said to start wearing N95s. That's great, Bob. I'm so glad you brought that up. We really do need good masks fits, because as good as the filtration might be on your mask, if it doesn't lie flush against your skin, that part of the air is not getting filtered and you could be easily inhaling COVID particles. So you want things that sit flush against your nose and your face all around, as well as having a good degree of filtration. So surgical masks don't cut it. People often wear them here anyway. And then you've got all this area here. If you see the footage people take of infrared cameras, there's clearly air particles and potentially viral particles being exhaled and inhaled through that gap there. So you don't want gaps. Kids have no problems with masks. I know people with children who are 3 and 4 and they're fine with a mask on. Absolutely. My children have been wearing masks for ages now and they're great with them. They don't complain. They just want nice looking ones. So I'm trying to upgrade because I got some KN95 masks and they didn't fit their faces very well. So I don't really know how you get N95 masks for children, but if anybody has any tips, feel free to pass them on to me, because we are in for a big wave of Omicron cases. It's as contagious as bloody measles. And that idea of it being less severe, the data's still being compiled. There's some promising looking findings, tentative findings, but what we can still really tell you is if Omicron is more infectious than Delta, then even a smaller percentage of people with Omicron being sick being severely sick with the Omicron virus relative to the Delta. A smaller percentage of a bigger number is still, in just actual number terms, a very large number. So there could be, so it's a fallacy to think, oh, Omicron's milder than Delta, there'll be less people severely sick with COVID. No, in terms of actual numbers, there could be a higher number of people with who end up hospitalized from COVID with the Omicron variant. We don't know at this stage. Molly has triple layer cloth ones with a filter in them that fit right up against our faces. Good work, Molly. I'm going to go get a drink of water, and I will see everybody hopefully soon. Oh, sorry for leaving Trump's face up there. I was glad he spoke out to say vaccines were effective, because not because I want to preserve the lives of his followers. It's individual for each person how much Trump cult delusion mixes with their own predilections for being racist and overlooking the crimes and misconduct of a demagogic white authoritarian race supremacist. But Trump supporters aren't just endangering themselves, they're endangering their communities, they're harming vulnerable people, they're harming people who have less access to medical care and who don't have health insurance. Because even though the vaccine is free, if you've been tricked out of getting the vaccine and you contract COVID, you can severely upend your life and your family's lives, to say nothing of losing loved ones, losing grandparents, and to a lesser degree, not a lesser degree, but to a lesser risk, losing children, losing younger members of your family, losing parents of young children, orphaning children. There's been apparently over 140,000 children who've lost a caregiver in the United States, whether that caregiver be a parent or a grandparent. Think of all the families whose lives have been just completely overturned in a negative way by the initial failure to contain COVID and by the failure to promote masks and social distancing and all of the COVID mitigation measures. Even when Trump got vaccinated initially, he failed to notify the public of that. He failed to promote getting vaccinated at that critical point in the pandemic. In fact, in the months of where the highest numbers of Americans were dying each day, 4,000 Americans were dying each day around the time of the election and its aftermath, and Trump was choosing to focus all his energy and his efforts on illegally conspiring to overthrow the election results behind the scenes and to incite his followers to outrage through lying to them and through promoting lies. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care and goodbye. Hello.